everyone, my name is Anna. I welcome you all back to another video where we are going to be continuing with our series called Studies of the Brit Hadasha that are given in this channel of Young Pilgrims. For today's video, we are going to be analyzing the chapter 7 of Luke along with the first 3 verses of chapter 8. The title for this study is the Emunah that saves and the unbelief that enslaves. In chapter 7, since it's the chapter that we're mainly going to be focusing on, we're going to be reading that Luke primarily focuses his narration or his verses, his chapter, on Yeshua demonstrating his authority and his compassion through his miracles and the interactions that he had with other people through healings, through liberations, through making very clear that who he was, what was his purpose, etc. In chapter 7, as well as in chapter 8, we are going to be reading that these miracles that Yeshua performed towards other people, which some of these people that received these miracles were not Israelites. They were Roman people or people that had not been raised being instructed in the Torah. And we're going to be reading how, despite them not being part of the Israelite lineage, Yeshua still gives them that miracle so that they can be testimony that Yeshua was that Messiah that they were waiting for, and that was going to come and was going to give not only all of these liberations, all of these healings, these miracles to the people of Israel, but also to the other people of the nations who wanted to not only recognize Yeshua as a Messiah, but to also return to the Father through Yeshua, and in that way every soul could be able to have the opportunity to know of the Father, to know of the messages of or the teachings of Yeshua, and to also have the opportunity to have their hearts renewed, and to also have the way of thinking renewed, and they can be a new person. And we're going to be reading all of these miracles that Yeshua did, which give, at the end of everything, we're going to be coming to the conclusion that they give good testimony of who Yeshua was, what was his ministry, and how he was fulfilling it. And also we're going to be reading how Yeshua even clarifies that when the disciples of John the Baptist come towards him and they ask him if he is the Messiah that had been promised to the people of Israel back then in the times of the patriarchs. And in this chapter 7, we are going to be reading the following miracles. First miracle that we're going to be reading about is the healing of the centurion's servant. We're going to be reading how both of these men, the Roman official like the servant, were not Jewish people, they were Roman people, yet the Roman official, seeing the miracles and hearing about all the works that Yeshua was doing towards the people of Israel and towards people that were not part of the Israel lineage, we can read how he believes in Yeshua, and he believes that Yeshua could heal his servant. And we're going to be reading how Yeshua heals his servant, and they give testimony that Yeshua was the Messiah that the people were waiting for. We're also going to be reading in this portion of this healing that the centurion recognizes his unworthiness, that he was not clean enough for Yeshua to enter his house. And we're going to be reading how he tells Yeshua that he believes that Yeshua, just by saying the word "you're healed," his servant could be healed from far away. And that's precisely what happened, because Yeshua saw this faith in this man who was not Israelite, who did not grow up being instructed in the Torah and the promises that were given to the people of Israel from the Eternal. However, we can see this faith that this Roman official has, and that at the end of everything we're going to be reading, how it gives us that are reading this portion, it gives us a good testimony, and it gives us an example of how our faith should be. Another healing that we are going to be reading in this chapter is the healing of a widow's son in Nain. We will read that Yeshua enters a funeral procession for a widow's only son, and Yeshua, moved by the compassion, he approaches the casket of this dead body, and he touches it and commands the young man to rise. And not only are these words of the Messiah fulfilled, but also Yeshua restores the son, and he gives his son back to his mother. And we're going to be reading this, another miracle that we're going to be reading about. Also, we're going to be reading in chapter 7 about the supper that took place in Simon the Pharisee's house. And in this event, we're going to be reading that Yeshua meets a sinful woman who enters this house, and although she wasn't allowed to enter it, however, she does whatever it is necessary for her to do, so she can go inside this house and meet who Yeshua was, learn about him, hear about his words, etc. And we're going to be reading how Yeshua recognizes this woman, and this woman anoints Yeshua's feet with expensive ointment, or with an expensive oil, and which, because of this action that this woman does, it causes a discussion about forgiveness and faith within the people that were inside Simon the Pharisee's house. And this is a very short introduction of what we are expecting to be reading about in this chapter 7 and in the first 3 verses of chapter 8. Now we're going to begin reading verses 1 to 10 of chapter 7, which say, it says, when Yeshua had finished saying all this to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. There a centurion's servant, whom his master valued highly, was ill and about to die. The centurion heard of Yeshua and sent some elders of the Jewish to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Yeshua, they pleaded with him, saying, "This man deserves to have you do this, because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." Verse 6, Yeshua went with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to Yeshua, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. That is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself, a man under authority, with soldiers under me, I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." Verse 9. When Yeshua heard this, he was amazed at him, and turning to the crowd following him, he said, "I tell you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel." Then the men who had been sent returned to the house and found that the servant was well. In these verses, these first 10 verses of Luke, we can see that it's narrated about a centurion who was a person of Roman origin, who had a lot of power, who was in charge of a lot of soldiers. We can read how he, obviously because he was a Roman soldier, he was, how I said in the introduction, he had not been instructed in the Torah. Therefore, he didn't have much knowledge of the coming of the Messiah. However, in these verses, we can read that this man had helped the Jewish people to build their synagogue and to bring that area up. And because of that, these Jewish people who the centurion talks to them, expressing this miracle that he wanted to receive from Yeshua. This is why the Jewish people, despite him being a Roman official, they fulfill, or they go to Yeshua. They listen to this Roman official because he had done great works for them, and therefore these Jewish people were also going to be doing great works for this Roman official. How? By going to Yeshua and making by going to Yeshua and telling Yeshua the necessity that this Roman official had. In these verses, we can also read that although this Roman official was in charge of 100 soldiers and he did have a lot of power, how we read in the last verses that when he tells someone to do something, they do it, or when he tells someone to go, they go, etc. This power that this person had, although it was a lot, and many people, when they have this type of power, they take advantage of other people. They start acting with injustice. They start overworking people. They mistreat people, etc. However, this man was very different. Why? Because we can read that he was humble. He did not he was humble, and because of that humbleness that he had, we can read that he loved, or he cared for this beloved servant who was about to die. And him hearing about Yeshua, he immediately sent for Yeshua to come, he sent for Yeshua through some Jewish elders, so that way Yeshua can hear about his case and fulfill this miracle that he was asking for. And just by the simple fact that this man having a lot of power, and then having this servant that was about to die, he wasn't ruthless, and he didn't say, oh well, I'm gonna just let him die, I can just buy another one, everything's fine. He didn't act that way. He acted the opposite. He was looking at his servant, he was looking at the condition of his servant, and not only does he look at it, but also he tries to, he is looking for a way of healing his servant from that illness that was killing him. And this gives a very good testimony of who he was. Yes, he was not Jewish. Yes, he was not, or he had not been instructed in the Torah. However, he acted with justice. He acted with humility. He cared about his servant, and because of that, we can read that Yeshua sees this humility in him, or his humbleness, and he gives this miracle to this Roman official. In this Gospel of Luke, although Luke does not give much detail about this man's personal life, we can still come to the conclusion that he was merciful and that he was a good man. If we compare to other people who received miracles from Yeshua, this centurion was pleased to help the people and did not abuse his position. We can even read how some people receiving miracles from Yeshua, liberations, healings, etc. The moment that they received the miracle, they recognized Yeshua as the Messiah, but that was just it. They went on with their life like nothing happened, and very different from this centurion, who from the beginning acted with mercy, acted with compassion, and after that he continued to act like that. And because of this reason, it is why the elders insisted to Yeshua that he should be helped, just as he had helped them before. we read that Yeshua agreed, and when they were arriving to this Roman official's house, he sent some of his friends to tell Yeshua that he recognized his state, he recognized the state of his house, and he sent his friends to tell Yeshua that he did not feel worthy for Yeshua to go or to enter his house, and we can read how, or in this action that this man takes about not feeling worthy of Yeshua entering his house. Once again, we see this humility of this man, who despite all of his good deeds, he recognized his condition of impurity before Yeshua, but at the same time, he demonstrated his great faith. Why? Because he was sure that the word of the Messiah was enough, was sufficient for his servant to be healed. He trusted in Yeshua's power and in Yeshua's authority. For this reason, it is why he tells his friends to just tell Yeshua that just by saying the word, he believes that his servant could be fulfilled. Yeshua, hearing this expression of this Roman official, he is amazed by his faith, because as we read in these verses, not even in Israel had there been found such great faith in the people. So because of this faith of this Roman official, his servant was healed. And here we can see an allusion to the fact that the Gentiles were going to be inserted into the people of Israel through Yeshua. And this special group of the people of Israel, even it's something that we're going to be reading later on in this gospel. Yeshua clarifies that this group of people of Israel that he was going to rise was not going to be a physical one, but rather it was going to be a spiritual one. So this is a allusion of these words that Yeshua had said in his time when he was in this earth. Also, if we remember, and how we've already studied, the people who were going to have the opportunity to be part of this spiritual people of Israel were the souls who remained in obedience, who remained in faith, and who remained in faith, in obedience, and in trust towards the Father, and always giving a good service to the Father through the Messiah. Continuing with verses 11 to 16, it says, "Soon afterwards, Yeshua went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. As he appeared the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the town was with her. When Yeshua saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, 'Don't cry.' Then he went up and touched the casket they were carrying him on, and the barriers stood still. He said, 'Young man, I say to you, get up.'" Verse 15, "The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Yeshua gave him back to his mother. They were all filled with awe and praised Elohim, saying, 'A great prophet has appeared among us. Elohim has come to help his people.'" Verse 17, "This news about Yeshua spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country." What we can read in this portion of verses is that when Yeshua entering this town called Nain, he sees this funeral ceremony, we can say, that was going on. And when he sees everything that's happening, when he sees this condition of this woman that was widowed, and that now she had lost her only son, Yeshua was filled with compassion. Yeshua showed this kindness towards this woman. He sees her and he tells her, "Do not cry." And not only that, but he also basically resurrects his her son, and he gives her son back to this widowed woman. This act of Yeshua, it was another way of him clearing out, of him demonstrating who he was and how he was feeling. He was fulfilling with this mission that he had as the Messiah that had been promised to the people of Israel since the times of the patriarchs, and how all of these promises were being fulfilled, and how it was time for these people to open their eyes, to believe this, to accept Yeshua as the Messiah, to believe in him, because the promise had been fulfilled. The time had already come, and they had to recognize it. We can see how he approaches, or we can read how he approaches the coffin, and he told this deceased person to stand up, and that's what happened. He stood up, and he was handed over to his mother. It is quite an impressive event that we can read in these verses. We can even read how the people were surprised. It was something that was not normal for things like this to happen. And we can read how in these actions of Yeshua in this event, it demonstrates that he was a messenger of Elohim. And so because of this, the people exalt the Creator, exalt Elohim, they praise Elohim, they recognize Elohim, and they recognize that a great prophet had been raised up among them, as how I had said, as this promise was given in the Torah, and that we can find, or that we can read in the Torah. And seeing this action of the people of Nain, we can read, or once again, it fulfills the words of Yeshua when he said that people were going to exalt Elohim. People were not going to exalt him, but Elohim. And that's precisely what happens in these verses. The people, instead of exalting and praising and recognizing Yeshua, like giving him all of the credit of this miracle that he had done, the people do not do that. Rather, they exalt Elohim, they worship, they praise Elohim, and they recognize this promise that Elohim had fulfilled in the people of Israel. And how I said, not only in the people of Israel, but also it was a time for the people of the nations to be united, or to be entered into these promises. In this story, we can also see a message given to us. It tells us that the hope and the Emunah, or the faith of the people in that they have to Yeshua, they are allowed, or they have that opportunity to have their lives restored. And that is what was happening with these people, that seeing Yeshua, they recognized him, they believed in him, they had faith in all of these miracles that Yeshua can do. They received their miracles, healings, liberations, resurrections, etc. And now in our times, that we are reading these verses, and that we believe in the Messiah, and that we recognize that the Messiah has come, and that we have faith, or we adapt the faith that Yeshua teaches us in his good news. Now our life has now been restored, and not only our life, but also the way that we think, the way that we talk, the way that we believe. We have been restored completely. How also the apostles write or teach in the cards to the nations. And this is what we can see or what we can read in these verses. From verses 18 to 35, it is narrated that John the Baptist was in prison, and he sends two of his disciples to ask Yeshua if he really was the Messiah, or if the people would have to wait for another Messiah to come. At first, when we read this and remembering what we had read in the beginning of this gospel and what we have also read in the Gospel of Matthew and in the Gospel of Mark, it can be, or it can seem like kind of questioning us. Does John not remember who Yeshua was? Does John not remember when he saw Yeshua and when in front of the people he declared that he was the Messiah that they were waiting for, the liberator? Kind of like questioning if John was really doubting, or what was the whole point of John sending his disciples to Yeshua to ask him a question that he himself had recognized the moment he saw Yeshua. And we can even question ourselves, how could John ask this question, or how can John doubt about this? Let's remember how I was saying, John the Baptist was the first one to declare that Yeshua was the Lamb of Elohim who had come to take away the sin of the world. Not only that, but also furthermore in the Gospels, we can read that in Yeshua's immersion, John the Baptist, when the moment that he immersed Yeshua, he heard the voice of the Almighty saying and declaring that Yeshua was the beloved Son in whom he was pleased. So remembering these events that happen with John the Baptist and Yeshua, it makes it easier to understand, or understanding that we can conclude that John the Baptist really was not confused. He was not doubting, much less doubted who the Messiah was, and if he was fulfilling that calling. In other words, John the Baptist was 100% sure of who Yeshua was and the calling that he was fulfilling, or his ministry that he was fulfilling. The reason why, or the intention why John the Baptist sends his disciples to come to Yeshua and ask him these questions was so in that way they themselves can hear this clarification from Yeshua's mouth, or the words of Yeshua. So in that way, they can stop questioning themselves if the Messiah had truly come, and in that way, the disciples would be very clear that Yeshua was the Messiah that they were expecting. In that way, they would not pay attention to the religious teachings that the people were saying, by the religious people, when they were saying that Yeshua was not the Messiah that had been promised to them, and that Yeshua was blaspheming. So with this, we can come to the conclusion that John the Baptist was not doubting. He simply sent his disciples so his disciples can hear can hear Yeshua's words clarifying that he was the Messiah, that he was fulfilling with his ministry, and to not pay attention to the words, or to the words that were given, or to the lies that were being said by the religious people. On the other hand, the reason why John the Baptist sent specifically two of his disciples, was because he was fulfilling the commandment that we can read in the Torah, where it says in Deuteronomy 35:20, and also in Numbers 35:20, and in Deuteronomy 19:15, where he says, "From the mouth of two witnesses every matter is established." We can read that after this interrogation of Yeshua and John the disciples and John's disciples, they leave, and Yeshua begins to speak of John, saying that he was the Elijah who would come to prepare the way before him, and that all of this was already fulfilled. And that is why the Messiah mentions that he was the greatest of the prophets, because John saw him come and begin his ministry. John saw Yeshua come and begin his ministry. However, Yeshua also clarifies that John is the least in the kingdom of the heaven, since he left before the delivery of the Messiah, which is the means that the Father established to enter his kingdom. Yeshua also clarifies that the kingdom mentioned in these verses is regarding to the will of the Eternal that had been established in the lives of everyone who believes in him through his Son, who is willing to obey, who is willing to obey the will of the Almighty, to deny himself and preserve himself in this promise, in this faith, until the end of everything. The Messiah makes it very, very clear that all the prophets had prophesied, yes, up until John the Baptist, who was the last prophet. But despite this, we can read how the Messiah says that generation was dissatisfied with everything, with the words or the prophecies of John the Baptist, like also with the words and the messages of Yeshua the Messiah. And because of this, Yeshua says, only those with ears can hear. That is a humble and willing heart that heard these messages and accepted these messages of the Messiah, were going to receive these promises of the kingdom of Elohim, very different from the people the rest of the people who were going to remain in unbelief, because they did not want to accept, they did not want to see, and they did not want to believe in this coming of the Messiah. On the other hand, we can read that that Yeshua says how the people despised and offered John the Baptist, how they killed him, how they mistreated him, and also how they criticized Yeshua and tried to tempt him. But we can read that in the end of all of these injustice, all of this mistreatment that John the Baptist, like Yeshua, would go through, the results of the work that they were carrying out, guided by the Holy Breath or by the Holy Spirit, they were only demonstrating the wisdom of the Eternal and confirmed that they were truly doing the Father's will, and that's all that they cared for. And this is the exact same thing that we can see in the life of the apostles, the life of the disciples, the life of the patriarchs, the life of King David, etc. And it's a testimony that we must also accept, and that we must apply or use as an example for our life. That for us, we shouldn't really care what other people can tell us, how they can treat us, how they categorize us, etc. What should really matter is that focus in fulfilling the will of the Eternal, remaining obedient to the Eternal, remaining in consecration to the Eternal, always giving good service to the Eternal. Continuing with the last portion of this chapter 7, which is verses 36 to 50, it is narrated how Yeshua was anointed with perfume by a woman whose sins had been forgiven. This is something that we have also already studied in the previous two Gospels, Matthew and Mark, and something that we are also going to be reading in this Gospel, and also we're going to be reading it in the next Gospel of John. And we're going to be reading, obviously, or when we are going to be reading all of these four versions of this event that happened with this woman who anointed Yeshua with this expensive perfume or this expensive ointment, we're going to be realizing how all of these four Gospels have a different way of narrating this event. Some provide more information than others. For example, in the Gospel of Matthew and Mark, it is said that this anointing was done in the house of Simon the leper, who had received also a healing from Yeshua. Very different from John's gospel, where it is narrated that the woman who anointed the Messiah was called Miriam, the sister of Lazarus. But although we do not have, for example, in this Gospel of Luke, it does not provide the name of the woman. But despite all of these different versions that we can read in these four Gospels, and although it does not have these specific details because every story is narrated in a different way by different authors, undoubtedly it does bring us many teachings, and especially with this story with this Gospel of Luke, since it is mentioned that in this day something more happened than just anointing Yeshua. And this is because in this Gospel of Luke, it is mentioned that Yeshua gives an indication, gives also a teaching towards the people that were in this house. And this information is something that is not cited or that is not given in the rest of the Gospels. This extra information that Luke provides in his Gospel is that Yeshua, after being anointed by this woman, he takes a moment to speak and to teach to the people in this house about Hasidut. This word, Hasidut, derives from chesed, which means kindness. Hasidut is a reflection of a eternal fearing life that fulfills the Torah by loving one's neighbor and showing kindness. The practice of Hasidut goes beyond the observance of the ritual laws and halakha imposed by Judaism. On another hand, in these verses we read that Simon, despite being a Pharisee, begs Yeshua to eat with him in his home or his house. This attitude is surprising because the Pharisees openly opposed to the teachings of the Messiah, always seeking to make him fall or even to ridiculate him. Although they were unsuccessful because Yeshua knew how to answer them and always did so with the truth, making it very clear that they loved their traditions, their religious traditions, more than the eternal. But in this case, it was different because despite the fact that Yeshua knew the Pharisees' attitudes, he agreed to this invitation that was being done by Simon the Pharisee. This shows us that he gave the opportunity to all people who wanted to approach him. He did not select certain people with whom he would want to eat with or with whom he would want to spend time with. No, Yeshua did not did not go around selecting people, but we can read how Yeshua accepts this invitation. He goes to this house that was a Pharisee's home, and he acts with this with humility. In this opportunity, we can also read how it is given to Miriam, the woman who in these verses is described as a sinner. Although it is not known specifically what her transgressions were that she had committed, perhaps they were serious ones, because we can read in these verses that she did not have a good reputation, and from what the verse tells us, she had not been invited to this dinner that was taking place in Simon the Pharisee's home. However, we can read how she hurried to go to this house as soon as she found out that Yeshua was there. She knew that she would not be well received by the owner of this house because of her reputation, but this did not stop her. Her desire to thank Yeshua was stronger, and we can see how she showed a very humble attitude by bowing herself to Yeshua's feet, kissing them, and anointing them with expensive perfume. lastly, in these verses, we can read that Simon had forgotten that obeying the Father also includes loving one's neighbor, which is helping them find their way back to the Father. And we can read how for Simon, this woman, Miriam, was already considered a person that was condemned. And he did not realize that she was doing teshuvah, that she was recognizing her state, her impure state, and that she was with all the intentions trying to get to Yeshua to have the opportunity to receive a healing, or to receive the opportunity for her to start over, to practice this faith that Yeshua was teaching to the people. The same kindness that Yeshua showed him, despite him being a Pharisee, by accepting his invitation, was going to be shown to her because she was humbling herself. She was recognizing the Messiah. Because of this, the Messiah showed him in these verses that he was wrong, and that she had acted even better than him because she first had Emunah, she had faith, and also practiced Hasidus. This passage leads us to reflect that thanks to his goodness, today we can do teshuvah through Yeshua, to have a new life where we were rescued, from a vain way of living. In these verses, Yeshua teaches us that when one rejects a person who is showing that they want to change, who recognizes their condition and is not happy with it, and rather desires to return to the Creator, they are also, and the people that treat them bad, they are also practicing sin. They are not demonstrating the renewal of their mind and of their hearts. When one looks down on others, it is like closing the doors of the kingdom to others. They are not allowed to receive the Eternal's forgiveness they are not allowed to receive the Eternal's forgiveness so that their life may be destroyed. This should help us remember that the Eternal gives every soul who sincerely seeks to draw close to him the opportunity to obey him, which this is considered chesed, goodness, that Yeshua teaches not only in this passage, but also teaches us through these passages that we find in these Gospels. To conclude with this study, chapter 8, verses 1 to 3, it mentions the names of some women who served the Messiah. These women were Mary Magdalene, Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's steward, and Susanna. These women had received healing from sickness, liberation of evil spirits, their sins being forgiven, and all of this through Yeshua. In this passage, we can read that in them there was this faith that brought salvation, since it was a good end that leads us that in this case that leaded them not only through belief, but also through their acts of obedience. And that's something that we can learn from them, although it doesn't give much detail, but it is a lesson that we can receive. The importance of letting us be led through belief, but also through acts of obedience, as we read in James 2, verses 14 to 17. And with this, we are going to end. It says, What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save him? Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, Go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In that same way, faith by itself is not if it is not accompanied by action, it is dead. And this is what we can analyze, what we can learn from this chapter 7 and first 3 verses of chapter 8 from the good news, or from the Gospels of Luke, and how the title of this video is, we must have that Emunah, that faith that saves us, and we should stay away from the unbelief that enslaves people. For example, we must remain like these people who received these healings, who had this faith, and therefore it gave them miracles. And with this woman that was a sinner, she was saved because her sins were forgiven because she had faith. Very different from the people who did not believe, like the religious people who did not believe, who only wanted to protect themselves, to protect their religious traditions, their religious messages, etc. And because of that unbelief, it is why they were enslaving themselves more into their sins and into the assimilation of this world. And well, this is all for today's video. Thank you very much for your time, and we will continue with the rest of the next chapter of this chapter 8 in the next study.